The diary fell out of the kitchen cabinet when I was clearing shelf paper. A plain composition book with the marbled cover that makes every childhood spelling test smell like glue. It was wedged under the top frame where a carpenter had used a shim too thin, and a bored tenant had discovered a hiding place that was obvious only if you stood on a chair and lost your balance. It hit the counter, flipped once, and rested open to a page dated the day I moved in. I laughed at the coincidence because small coincidences make a place feel like it wants you there, and then I read the first line and forgot how to laugh. Today you will wedge the fridge 3 inches from the back wall because the outlet sits low, and your elbow will ache. You will curse the cord, and you will tell yourself you are not angry at anyone living. I stood with my elbow still aching from the fridge and stared at the handwriting like a photo of an accident you remember having from a different angle. The entry went on with a rhythm I recognized as mine, noting the way I stack plates in threes and how I keep the chipped mug anyway because the chip lives where my lip does not touch. It predicted the part where I test an unfamiliar faucet to decide how much the handle lies about temperature. It ended with the time stamped in the right margin like a catalog card. 9:37 p.m. You will stand at the bedroom door and wonder whether you will ever sleep well here. You will tell yourself you are old enough to ignore the feeling that something has been waiting in this room longer than your lease. The clock over the stove read 9:31. I put the book down and moved through the rest of the entry like a person walking through a hall of mirrors trying not to flinch at each reflection. At 9:37, I stood in the bedroom doorway and asked myself whether the feeling in my chest belonged to a person or a room. In the morning, I opened to the next page because even people who do not believe in signs cannot resist a calendar that has chosen you. The date at the top was yesterday's and the next line's date was today's. The handwriting was the same and not the same. A careful block print that tried not to reveal a hand and failed anyway in the curves of S, and the stubborn way the lowercase g refused to close. Today, you will be woken by a truck backing up in the alley that no longer exists, and you will count the beeps though you tell yourself you did not hear them. You will eat a banana over the sink and finish it too quickly, and the peel will darken in the trash bag like a time lapse you did not film. You will think about texting your sister and decide to wait until the boxes look less like confession. I was chewing a banana I had not meant to eat, and the little thread stuck between my teeth at the exact line break where the diary said small threads belong to old fruit and old lies. By then, I was telling myself it was a coincidence wrapped inside a routine, and that any life can be predicted if you have the shape of a person's morning. Then it told me a thing it should not have known. At 11:22, you will look up because the upstairs neighbor will drag a chair across the floor, and you will feel that familiar anger at the thinness of modern life. And then you will relax because you will remember you are on the top floor and above you is the roof and an old maintenance closet full of mops no one has used since 1998. At 11:22, a chair dragged on a floor above mine that did not exist, and my body did that small lightning strike of anger. And then I remembered the roof and felt ridiculous that a book had scored a hit by guessing that thin walls produce thin patience. At 11:23, my phone buzzed with a text from my sister asking whether I felt settled, and the diary said, "You will tell her the truth, which will be a lie measured by affection, that yes, you do. And then you will put the book back in the cabinet where you found it and tell yourself you will only read one more page before bed." I did not put the book away. I read it the way people read messages you should not read, standing in the kitchen in a posture that says you are about to be interrupted by reason. The writer did not sign their name. The entries were addressed in the second person to a you that felt like me and someone else wearing my face. The tone was not cruel. It was not even warning me. It was accounting for my minutes with an intimacy that suggested the book knew me without liking me. It described small humiliations I had told no one, like the way I use my phone screen as a mirror to check a tooth, and then pretend I was looking at messages when the world catches me doing it. It knew my coffee ratio. It knew how my left shoulder lifts when I lie, and how my right ear reddens when I am angry and do not speak. It knew the path my bare feet take from bed to sink in the dark, and how I keep my hand near the wall at the exact place where the hallway narrows to pretend a touch that my hand understands as a promise. The pages wore tiny dents where a hand had pressed too hard at the end of certain sentences, as if the writer had been fighting the urge to cross out less kind truths. I tried to break it. That is what you do with magic when you want to prove you are a grown person allowed to vote and file taxes. I decided to do the opposite of an entry to see whether the day would bend or the book would change. The diary said at 4:18 you will go downstairs and get the mail and read the postcard from your mother twice, once for content and once for the way she writes the word love, which always looks like live. At 4:17 I walked past the mailbox without opening it and went to the corner store for milk I did not need. I loitered in front of the freezer case, choosing between brands with identical cows on the cartons to eat a minute, and then returned triumphantly to my box as if I had beaten a stopwatch. The postcard was there anyway, and inside the apartment I set it on the counter without reading it and opened the diary to the next line like a judge asking for a verdict. You will pretend you are not reading her, and it will hurt the part of you that only knows how to be good by reading everything. Third line down, the ink grew darker, where the pen tip had sat longer. You will finally read it at 4:51, and you will misread her love as live, and you will think briefly that your mother is telling you to live, and then you will tell yourself not to be sentimental in a kitchen that does not yet know your name. At 4:51, I read it and cried in the ugly, short way children cry when they want the next day to get a different postcard. I told myself the book had coached me into it, and that free will needs better lawyers. I went to the property manager the next morning because there are rules about leases and disclosures, and I needed the ordinary annoyance of a person on a low chair behind a tall desk to scuff the edge of the uncanny. She was polite in the way of people who have heard every question twice. She knew of no book. She could not give me a forwarding address for the previous tenant because they had not left one. He broke his lease, she said, and used the word he in a way that made me picture a man who folded the corners of paperbacks instead of using bookmarks. She said he left in a hurry. She said he left some damage behind, mostly to himself, and then she changed the subject because dignity comes before gossip. I asked whether anyone had died in the unit, and she said no with a confidence so crisp I believed her, even though anyone can say no to that question and be right in spirit and skewed in detail. Back upstairs, the diary lay on the counter where I had left it with a casualness that felt staged. The page for today was already filled in to the bottom, and the next page was dated tomorrow, with the first 4 lines written and the rest blank. Today included something I had not yet done. 7:12 p.m. You will drop the mug by the sink and catch it with a move you have performed twice in your life, the second being today, and you will feel a gratitude so sharp you will be embarrassed to have it directed at yourself. Let the gratitude be small. Everything after that sentence was about the night, about the first time the hallway will feel longer than it is, about standing by the window to see whether the alley was real or a rumor, and then a line that made me grip the counter. At 2:06 a.m., you will read this line and you will look up because the upstairs chair will drag on a floor that is not there. At 2:07 a.m., he will write, I looked at the smudge at the end of that last stroke and put my thumb against it like I could catch the warmth of a hand. The ink was dry. The air felt stale. I put the diary back in the cabinet where I had found it and slept on the couch with the kitchen light on because pretending not to care requires light. The day obeyed the book until I started to forget to test it. I caught the mug and cried a little because gratitude hurts when you do not have someone to spend it on. At 2:06, I looked up because the chair dragged again on a roof stacked with old mops and maybe something else. At 2:07, the diary waited in the cabinet, and I drank water so I would have an excuse not to open it. I opened it anyway. The line for 2:07 was short. You will read this and touch the ink and tell yourself it is dry. It was not. My thumb came away gray. I tasted metal and old keys. I went back to the couch and hid under the blanket like a person who knows a blanket is not a wall and has decided to be 8 for 10 minutes. In the morning, the page for tomorrow had grown a few lines. The ink at the end of those lines was damp. I bought a fresh notebook to keep my own notes because dueling accounts felt like a fight a human could win. I wrote down the book's predictions as if they were weather, and then the details of the day like a meteorologist with a grudge. By noon, I was laughing at myself, and by evening my handwriting had grown mean and tight. When I copied the diary sentence about the neighbor knocking and asking for a cup of sugar at 8:13, there was a knock at 8:13 and no one was at the door because the neighbor had sent a text instead from the hallway asking whether I could buzz her in. I stared at the blank space in my notes where my own ending of that sentence should be, and put a period and told myself this would look better later, when I wanted proof that the world obeyed punctuation. After midnight, an entry about the lights fluttering in the hallway made me look into that thin space between the stove and the counter, where the old wiring hums and the hum matched the rhythm of the lines my pen was making, and my pen tried to match the rhythm of the hum, and I wrote a sentence I had not chosen. At 2:07 you will stop resisting the shape of the night. The next morning, my copybook had new writing that was not mine on a page I had left blank, and the letters were mine except better, smoothed into something my hand would have liked to be. It was a description of me eating toast too fast at 8:19 and the part where I spill crumbs, then curse and sweep them with a bare palm because I do not want to find the broom. I made the toast slowly, holding eye contact with the book like a hostage negotiator telling a thief that he can have the money if he stops pointing the gun at everyone, and I still swept the crumbs with a bare palm, and the diary wrote 8:20 when I did. The earliest entries in the diary were about other days in the same steady voice. They described the last week in this unit of a man who left in a hurry and tried to return his keys without touching the manager's hand because a superstition had taken hold and told him that contact mattered. They noted the day he stopped going to the roof to smoke and tried the stairs instead and came back shaking because the stairwell made a new noise when he put his foot on the third step from the top, and that noise sounded like writing. They described the morning he decided to burn the book, and the afternoon he bought a metal wastebasket, and the evening he did not light the match because the book had written a list of the people who would smell the smoke, and he did not want to talk to any of them. They described me before I had seen the place, the email I wrote to schedule the showing, the exact phrase I used to talk myself into signing. The entry for the day he left ended with a line that I did not then understand. He will be you now. The book was dated every day after that anyway. If you think you would have thrown the thing away, imagine living alone and keeping your sanity like a balance on a card with fees. You do not throw away the thing that tells you you exist. You test it. You plead. You buy a camera to film your kitchen now because you want to see the pages fill. The camera recorded nothing special except the way my body acts when I am alone, the way I pause at the sink before drinking as if the water must allow me, the way I touch the cabinet as if asking permission. The book filled while I slept. The ink on the new lines had drag marks at the ends, as if a hand had been taught to lift late. At 3:33, it would describe how I would wake and drink and stand at the window and look down at the parking lot. At 3:34, it would describe the woman in the red coat who would cross the lot and pause under the broken light and look up at my window and pretend she was checking her phone. At 3:35, it would write precisely the moment my hand would lift to wave, and how I would stop because I would realize the wave was an answer to a question I had not heard. Every time I tried to do it different, the lines waited and then resumed at the moment they had always planned, as if I had given myself a tiny commercial break. I tried to find out who he was because names can anchor a story, and sometimes the thing you can name you can dismiss. The property manager would not help, and the mailbox had a blank slot where a name had been pried off with a key, and the neighbors shrugged in that careful way. People shrug when they have a primary story to survive. A clerk at the corner store said he wore a blue jacket and bought soup and a newspaper, and never looked up because looking up tells the block you have time for them. The clerk said he came in the day before he left and asked for batteries and a pen and looked bad in the way people look when they have been writing and want to stop. That night the diary wrote, "You will buy batteries and a pen and wish for a clerk who does not notice," and I bought both from the same man, and he looked at me as if prediction is a kind of uniform. The next entry said at 11:07 the chair will drag on the roof and you will tell yourself wind, and at 11:08 you will tell yourself ghost, and at 11:09 you will tell yourself a word you have not used since you were 10 and drawing maps of imaginary forts. I whispered monster and felt better for using it because categories make the world manageable until they do not. Once, in the thick of it, I took the diary to Jenna because she had once humored me about a mirror that paused before it smiled, and because friendship is large enough to hold one ridiculous thing. We sat at her table, and I read her the entry about the way her cat rubs the corner of the table when she stands to get water, and how she always laughs at the same place in a story where there is no joke. She laughed at that exact place, and then she argued because you do not want your laughter to be a thing that belongs to a book. She asked who writes it, and I said, "Who do you think writes it?" And we both looked at my hands. She told me to leave it with her, and I said, "I cannot." And she said, "You must," and I said, "I cannot," because part of me expected to come home to a day with no page, and I was not brave enough for that. At her door, she touched my shoulder and said, "Stop reading the last line each day," and I promised, and then broke the promise on my way to the bus. Because promises made next to a cat are easy, and promises made next to a locked cabinet are not. The last page that had already been written when I found it was dated a week from the day I opened it, which meant that the book was filling ahead by 1 week, and I had been living on time someone else had already walked. The last page for that week described a night I am ashamed to write because I have always prided myself on not being dramatic. It described my breath slowing at 3:11 and my hand lifting from the couch at 3:12 and the shape in the doorway that would be me if I had slept at the wrong angle forever. It said a single sentence at 3:13 with a finality that made the line thicker. He will write. I shut the book and hid it again while telling myself that hiding is not the same as obeying. That night I did everything to interrupt the script. I drank coffee at 10, like a man trying to break a clock. I turned every light on and left the TV to a city council rerun with a crawl of names that had nothing to do with me. I put music on my phone and set it to a song that had defined a summer when all we did was grin in parking lots and wait for no one. At 3:11 my breath slowed. At 3:12 my hand lifted. Something like a shadow collected in the doorway to the kitchen. The upstairs chair dragged on a floor of mops. The music did not help and the lights did not help, and the TV talked about zoning, and then the sound ate itself on a syllable, and all I could hear was the hum of old wiring. I walked to the cabinet and took down the book like a man who has signed a contract in a language he agreed to without a translator. On the kitchen table, I found a pen, and my hand settled into a grip that was not exactly mine. The line for 3:13 waited with a period, and my hand knew what to do about a sentence that had not yet been written. It began to write what I had done today, not in the future tense like the other entries, but in the small, proud past tense of someone who accounts for a day before the day goes soft. I wrote you woke to the beeping that does not belong to a truck, and you waited until the second set, because you wanted to be sure you were not dreaming. You ate the banana with the thread. You read the postcard and cried. You caught the mug and felt ashamed of joy. You went to the property manager and asked questions in a voice that wanted the word no to be a shield. You tried to outwalk a page. You failed and kept walking. The pen glided as if the line had been scored lightly into the paper by a wheel and the ink knew where to settle. At 3:17, the upstairs chair dragged again, and the pen wobbled into a jag that made me recoil as if I had drawn blood. The book did not resist. It wanted my hand. The rest of the week I tried not to pick it up and failed by a different interval each night. By Thursday, the entries were entirely in my hand, and the timestamps read like a patient who has memorized their appointment schedule. You will hold a coin between your teeth so your mouth has something to do while you wait for 2:06, and then you will laugh at yourself because you will remember your mother telling you that superstition should never involve your mouth. You will stand in the doorway at 2:07 because you cannot help the habit of marking time with your body. You will write. I began to slip in small lies to see if the next day would bend. I wrote that I would not answer the text from the old friend who would ask how the new place felt. And the next day, I answered anyway with a heart and a thumb. And then I went back and added a line in yesterday's page that said, "You lied to yourself about the text," as if I had returned to my own record to scold an earlier version of me. The book accepted the revision like a river accepts a stick. I wrote that at 11:30 I would drop the mug and let it shatter, that I would welcome the sound, that I would bleed a little and be honest about the relief. And at 11:30 I set the mug down too hard and it rocked and I caught it, and I wrote after the fact that I had meant to break it, and I was too kind. My handwriting in those lines looked like the earlier lines had, rounded and soft. The book had taught my hand to speak a language a previous person had learned from someone before him. The last page carried the line I had been avoiding. He will write. He was never named, not the man who left, not the person the book believed I would be for someone else, not the thing on the roof that learned the sound of a chair. I thought about burning it again and pictured the smoke and the manager and the conversations and the smell in the curtains and the fact that smoke follows names. I went to the corner store at 11 and bought more pens, like a person who decides if you cannot stop a thing, you can help it look nice. I wrote my day for the next person in a voice that tried to be kind, without being clear. I wrote that they would find a book behind the cabinet frame, and that they would tell themselves the first page was clever, and then that it would hurt a little to be seen, and that they should drink water when their mouth goes dry. I wrote that they would be tempted to open the door at 2:07 and they should not because the chair is heavy even when it is only sound. I wrote that they should call their sister and tell the truth about being afraid because fear can withstand names better than silence. I wrote that if they make a small mistake, the line will forgive it if they apologize to the fence, which made no sense in our building, but I have learned that hard rules migrate between streets. I wrote that they would write, and that the shame they feel about helping a thing continue is a tax paid by decent people to forces that do not care what you call them. Now it is late, and this page is about to end, and the book has its own habits about margins and endings, and I can feel where it wants the period. The upstairs chair is quiet, and the hum has found a kind of truce, and the alley is either real or not, and both feel like victory tonight. I will put this book back where it belongs, because the person after me will need to pretend to discover it, and discovery is a gift we can leave. If you are listening with your ears instead of the eyes I have been borrowing to tell you this, here is the last useful thing I know. When a page already contains your day, you still choose the pressure of the pen. You can write gently or you can carve. The letters will look the same to anyone else. The difference is in your hand. I'm going to slide the diary into the cabinet frame with the care of a man laying a sleeping child in a crib he built himself. And I am going to stand at the bedroom doorway at 9:37 and ask whether I can sleep here. And I am going to answer myself differently this time, even if the book disagrees. Tomorrow's page is half written, and the ink is still a little wet, and I can see the first line of a name that is not mine. I will not say it out loud because you should learn the shape of it on your own tongue. When you flip to today and read about the moment you looked up just now and then glanced toward your left shoulder because you felt watched, you will also see the line I am writing with your eyes as you listen. You will read that at this exact second, you will hear a faint scrape from inside the cabinet where a book has been waiting, and you will decide whether to open it. If you do, drink some water first. Your mouth will go dry.